The samples are free.
Yes.
Okay. I'll give a quick introduction, then there'll be a formal introduction by Terry Quilico. Karen Tintori has written one of the classic books of the Italian-American experience on the Cherry Mine disaster, where and the details will come out on that. That's one of the landmark events in Italian-American history, illustrating the conditions to which Italian immigrants were subjected to in the early years of their migration to the U.S. So Terry Quilico will now, who has some roots in Cherry.
Karen. I'm going to start with a reading, short reading from one of my favorite passages in this epic book, Trapped. This is the morning of the day the mine disaster began, Saturday, November 13th, 1909. Johnny Galletti rose before dawn to eat a hurried breakfast of biscotti dipped in strong coffee, same as he had every day since he was a kid. Before morning could swallow the fading glimmer of moon from the sky, he, his brother and brother-in-law would be swinging their pickaxes down in the inky caverns of the Cherry Mine. He watched over the rim of his coffee mug as his mother, Beatrice, and sisters, Mary Corsini and Olinda Galletti, packed the men's lunches into deep covered metal pails. Beatrice glanced over her shoulder, taking note of the empty chair beside Johnny. Her nephew John was still in bed, sleeping off a hangover. She sliced up a chunk of his cold polenta and added it to the one already in Johnny's lunch pail. John wouldn't have the stomach for it, and Johnny would have to dig twice as fast today to offset his digging partner's absence. The miners were paid by the ton, and the rock they hacked out along with the coal didn't count. Cold polenta was the same lunch his father and grandfather had carried out to the mountains in Italy, where they tended sheep, but Johnny liked the cornmeal mush best the way his mother cooked it for dinner, sliced thin and fried in butter. Sometimes, when they could afford it, she'd dust the top with Parmesan cheese. And looking through Karen Tintori's brilliant career, I was searching for some commonality that I share with her. Like her, I have bristled with librarians, but unlike her, I only have one book in the Library of Congress and only a very gracious rejection letter of a screenplay they sent to Paul Newman when he was filming The Color of Money. That's about it. And then I saw it. Journalism. Karen received her degree in it. So we share these roots in the Fifth Estate. And really, I don't think there is a better discipline to learn your craft than this. Having to write the deadlines in a limited space to communicate on a specific topic or event under the gaze of a copy editor really focuses the mind. On Frankie DiPiero's recent interview with Karen on the Keeping It Real podcast, she referred to using her journalist head to tackle a literary problem. So I began my writing for pay career while in college. My professor told me, Mr. Quilico, you need to go down to the Joliet Herald. The copy editor knows you're coming and will give you something to do. Yes, I was on a last name basis with my professor. My fellow students and I called these programs work release, as our school was down the road from the state pen. But as I knew I was destined to write the great American novel and win a Pulitzer to boot, I looked forward to being a leg man or getting assigned to the police beat with visions of Ernest Hemingway and John Dos Passos dancing in my head. So the day dawned and I parked in front of the newspaper building that was quarried of the same stone that they used for the city jail. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, the first house, the printing press. and entered the city desk room. In it was a circular antique copy desk with a dozen chairs around the outside, with a grizzled geezer sitting in the middle who looked like someone from Central Casting for Citizen Kane, a dead ringer for the befuddled editor of the first paper that Charles Foster took over with his daddy's money. It was no police beat for me. Rather, I would have the obituary and society page to write about the recently deceased and the debutantes debuted. My brief was to call funeral homes and matrons and write X number of words in clear, precise prose. I did so for my first 2 days. And then the flowery script erupted. Farmer Brown is no longer plowing the back 40 on his John Deere, but will be plowed under himself after services in the Farmers Rest Memorial Chapel. Or the Bessie Boudreaux Bridge Club will meet at 7 p.m. on the 25th. Bessie issued a stern warning that card sharping will be strongly discouraged. It is safe to say that none of my glorious scribbling made it to print, and my relationship with my editor plummeted. The conflict was more intense as it would only be the only copywriter to occupy that outer ring of the table in all the time I worked there. Finally, realizing my star would not ascend, and I'm sure to the immense relief of my boss, one day I went to lunch and didn't return. So it was not a triumph, but the experience sparked something inside me, and after college, when I was placed on active duty by the United States Navy Reserve, I considered becoming a journalist striker, but shortly thought better of it as I realized such activity would undoubtedly result in a court-martial and a subsequent incarceration. It would be many years later, after working on the side as a photojournalist in the anti-war movement, that I began a relationship with Franoy and its brilliant Medill School of Journalism graduate, Paul Basil, that I found an editor who pounded sense into me and took my flights of fancy down to sensible levels, resulting in the aforementioned LFC entry. Through the years, there have been many books that have inspired and intrigued me. Catch-22 by Heller, Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath come to mind, but none has changed the course of my life and enriched the understanding of my roots and personal history as Karen Tintori's brilliant telling of the 1909 Cherry Mine disaster. Trapped. I was talking to a colleague here about my grandfather being a miner, and his cousin's vow never to go down to the mines again after the disaster, when Dominic overheard me and recommended Karen's book. Reading it brought me back to my childhood visits to my grandparents' home in Seatonville, which is 8 miles away from Cherry, Illinois, and the vision of the 3 sisters, the red and orange slag tailings of Seatonville, Ladd, and Cherry, that I would see from my bedroom window, and of my dad's tales as a child scavenging coal along the tracks that fell from the brimming coal trains for the kitchen stove. Reading that Karen's and my grandfather were both mining mere miles apart is the ultimate connection. I know, like most miners, they like to drink after their labors in the mine, and perhaps they shared a pail of beer or a glass of vino in one of the many, many taverns in the area. Trapped is meticulously researched and passionately written, covers the incredible chain of events that led to the biggest mine fire in the history of the US. The criminal incompetence of supervisors and managers at the scene, the courage of the rescuers and miners, the despair and outrage of their families, and the cover-up by the mining company at the inquest are all there. Of the 480 men who went down in the mine on November 13th, 1909, over half were trapped below when the fire raged out of control, while coal cars were filled with coal and brought to the surface. They didn't think the fire was that bad, and they left the miners in the mine. The mine was sealed in an attempt to put out the fire, and miraculously, a week later, 20 miners led by Tintori Quattaroli would emerge. Italians had the greatest number of immigrants of those killed in the disaster, some of which lived in Seatonville. It can be said that they did not die in vain because many child labor laws and state and federal safety regulations were enacted. The book prompted me to reach out to my relatives, go through family correspondence, and remember conversations with my father about my grandfather's decision to abandon work in the mine and take up work on the railroad that ironically owned the coal mines. And this resulted in my short play, Seatonville, and moreover, made me appreciate what my grandparents, my father and his sisters, and their cousin Mateo, and all those survivors went through during that tragic time. I can't wait to read Karen's Unto the Daughters, the legacy of an honor killing in an Italian-American family. Who knows? It may remind me of the story my dad told me of the time he picked up Al Capone as a fare when he drove a checker cab. I also have two questions for Karen. Did you meet Marcello Mastroianni when you were an extra? And what was it backstage with the Beatles? Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to present Karen Tintori.